What would you do if one day, a group of strangers showed up at your front gate and told you that your own land no longer belonged to you? Jake Bennett never thought he'd have to deal with something like that. When he inherited his grandfather's farm, he saw it as an escape, a way to finally leave behind the corporate grind and live life on his own terms. His land stretched for acres, untouched by the creeping suburban sprawl of Briarwood Estates, a planned community filled with manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and the worst thing imaginable, a homeowners association. Jake had no neighbors for miles, no interest in HOA rules, and no patience for people who thought they could dictate how he ran his farm. His land was his, legally and completely, and he intended to keep it that way. But that didn't stop Regina Holloway from trying. She arrived on a bright afternoon, stepping out of a sleek SUV like she was royalty. She wore a crisp white blazer, oversized sunglasses, and an expression of carefully controlled superiority. Two assistants, armed with clipboards, followed closely behind. Jake didn't need an introduction, he knew exactly who she was the moment she approached his gate. "Mr. Bennett," she greeted, flashing a rehearsed smile. "I'm Regina Holloway, president of the Briarwood Estates HOA. I'm here to discuss your property's future within our community." Jake leaned against the gate, arms crossed. "That so? Because last I checked, I'm not in your community." Regina let out a small, practiced laugh, the kind that usually preceded bad news disguised as an opportunity. "Oh, but that's where things have changed," she said smoothly. "With Briarwood expanding, we now consider your farm part of our extended neighborhood. That means we need to ensure all properties align with community standards." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me that because your development is creeping closer, I suddenly have to answer to you?" Regina's smile tightened. "It's about mutual benefits and maintaining a harmonious aesthetic. We wouldn't want conflicts to arise down the line." There it was, the thinly veiled threat. Jake had seen enough of those in corporate boardrooms to know exactly where this was going. He pushed off the gate, adjusting his hat. "I'll take my chances," he said, before turning and walking away. As he shut the gate behind him, he caught sight of Regina's assistants exchanging uneasy glances. Regina herself stood motionless, her fingers gripping her clipboard just a little too tightly. She wasn't used to hearing no. And Jake had a feeling she wasn't going to let it go. Jake didn't think much of Regina's visit at first. He figured she'd move on to easier targets, people who actually lived inside Briarwood Estates, people who cared about HOA meetings and voted on lawn decorations. But it only took a few days for him to realize she wasn't going to let it go. The first HOA letter arrived by mail, neatly typed on expensive stationery with the Briarwood logo stamped at the top. It was polite, filled with phrases like necessary compliance and mutual cooperation. They claimed his fencing didn't align with community standards and that his unauthorized land use needed to be reviewed. Jake chuckled, shaking his head at the absurdity. His farm had existed long before Briarwood was even built. The second letter came with a warning. It stated that continued non-compliance could result in fines and further action. This time, Jake didn't laugh. He tossed it straight into the fireplace. But the HOA wasn't just sending letters. One morning, as Jake was mending a section of his fence, he caught movement near the far edge of his property. Two men in polo shirts with HOA badges were walking along the fence line, measuring, taking notes, whispering to each other like they were on official business. Jake watched for a moment, debating how much patience he had left, before finally heading over. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, keeping his voice calm but firm. The men startled slightly before the wiry one with glasses cleared his throat. "We're conducting a routine inspection on behalf of Briarwood Estates, just making sure all properties in the area are up to standard." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That so? Because this isn't Briarwood Estates. It's my farm, and unless you boys have a warrant, you're trespassing." The other man, clearly less confident than his partner, gave a nervous chuckle. we were told this land was under HOA jurisdiction. Jake stepped closer. Asterisk asterisk who told you that, asterisk asterisk. Neither of them answered right away. The first one flipped through his notes, avoiding eye contact. It's part of our extended review. If there's been a misunderstanding, I'm sure we can. There's no misunderstanding, Jake cut in. I don't answer to your HOA. So unless you want the sheriff explaining trespassing laws to you, turn around and leave. Now. They hesitated but eventually backed off, muttering something about checking with the board. Jake watched them disappear down the road, already knowing exactly who had sent them. Regina wasn't going to take no for an answer. The next move was even bolder. Jake had left for town one morning to pick up supplies. When he returned, he found something that made his blood boil, a brand new sign staked near his property line. Future Community Enhancement Zone, pending development review. The Briarwood logo was printed right at the top. Jake ripped the sign out of the ground and tossed it into his truck bed. He wasn't sure whether to be more annoyed at the arrogance or the outright lie. There was no pending development. Not on his land. Not unless Regina planned to steal it, asterisk asterisk. The following morning, another letter arrived. This time, it wasn't just a letter, it was hand-delivered. Jake heard the crunch of tires on gravel and looked up to see a black sedan parked at the edge of his driveway. The driver, a nervous-looking man in a suit, stepped out and walked toward the porch, holding a folder marked, Compliance Review. Mr. Bennett, the man asked cautiously. Jake leaned against the railing, arms crossed. That depends. Are you here to buy eggs or waste my time? The man swallowed hard. I'm here to notify you that a compliance officer will be visiting your property next week to assess outstanding violations. Jake let out a slow breath. Let me save you some trouble. There are no violations, your HOA has zero authority here. The man opened his folder, flipping through pages. I think there's been some confusion about zoning expansions. As part of Briarwood's growing community, your farm may now fall under our jurisdiction, and we need to ensure it meets proper standards. Jake took a step forward, lowering his voice. And what happens if I don't comply? The man hesitated. Then, as if reading off a script, he said, failure to comply could result in escalating fines and legal intervention. Jake stared at him for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached over and plucked the folder right out of the man's hands. Flipping through the documents, he scoffed. Half of them were just generic HOA guidelines, asterisk no street parking, no basketball hoops in driveways, restrictions on mailbox colors, asterisk the other half. Pure intimidation. Jake handed the folder back. Tell Regina I don't scare easy. And if she sends anyone else to my land, I'll be calling the sheriff. The man gave a weak nod, turned, and all but sprinted back to his car. Jake watched the sedan disappear down the road, knowing full well this wasn't over. Regina wasn't just trying to annoy him anymore. She was trying to take his land. Jake had dealt with plenty of nuisances in his life, bad bosses, shady contractors, and more than a few con artists. But Regina Holloway? She was something else entirely. She wasn't just annoying. She was relentless. The morning after that ridiculous compliance review notice, Jake was outside checking his irrigation lines when he noticed something wasn't right. His well pump, which had worked perfectly for years, was dead. No water pressure. No hum of machinery. Just silence. Frowning, he opened up the main panel and took a look. His wiring had been cut. Jake inhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged his water supply. He could already guess who was behind it. He spent the next few hours rewiring the pump himself, thankful that his engineering background meant he didn't have to pay someone else to fix it. But as he worked, his frustration simmered. This wasn't just about HOA harassment anymore. This was a clear warning. Regina and her cronies wanted to make life as miserable as possible for him until he gave in. But she had underestimated him. By the time he had the pump running again, a new problem surfaced. His phone buzzed with a text from a friend at the farmer's market. *Hey, man. Just a heads up, health department shut down your stand. Something about sanitary concerns, *. Jake blinked. Sanitary concerns. He ran a clean operation, he had all the necessary licenses, followed safety guidelines, and had never once had an issue. He got in his truck and drove straight into town. Sure enough, when he got to the farmer's market, he saw a health inspector taping a violation notice onto his stand. Jake took a deep breath, keeping his temper in check. What's going on here? The inspector looked up. Anonymous complaint, he said flatly. Several, actually. Claims of improper food handling and unsanitary conditions. Jake exhaled sharply. He already knew who was behind this. And let me guess, he said, folding his arms. This came from Briarwood Estates? The inspector hesitated, then sighed. Look, I don't make the rules. I just follow up on complaints. He gestured to the stand. You'll need to schedule an inspection before you can sell here again. Jake clenched his jaw. He knew the drill. Even though the complaints were complete nonsense, he'd still have to go through the process. Paperwork. Delays. Lost income, ***. Regina was playing dirty. But two could play that game. When he got home, he checked his security cameras. And that's when he found the real smoking gun. The night before, two of Regina's HOA goons had been snooping around his property. They weren't just trespassing, they were planting trash near his livestock pens, trying to make it look like his farm was an unsanitary mess. Jake didn't waste any time. He downloaded the footage and emailed it straight to the county sheriff. Later that evening, as he sat on his porch, he heard the familiar sound of a patrol car pulling up. Sheriff Hank Lawson stepped out, tipping his hat. Jake, he greeted. Got your message. That footage is clear as day. Those HOA guys were trespassing. Jake nodded. I figured as much. Think it's enough to press charges? Hank smirked. Oh, absolutely. And I'll be having a little chat with Regina, too. But the fight wasn't over. A few days later, Regina launched her next attack. She sent out a fake community petition, claiming that Briarwood residents had unanimously voted to annex Jake's farm into the HOA. The document was filled with dozens of signatures. Jake got his hands on a copy, and within 5 minutes, he spotted a problem. Half the names? People who didn't even live in Briarwood Estates, some were dead, others had moved years ago, a few were completely made up. Jake brought the petition straight to his lawyer, Travis Cole, who wasted no time sending a legal response demanding an immediate retraction. But before Regina could even process that setback, Jake decided to hit her with something better. At the next county zoning board meeting, he presented everything, ***, the trespassing footage, the sabotage, the fake petition, and the fraudulent health complaints, ***. The zoning officials were not impressed. By the end of the meeting, Briarwood Estates was formally warned that any further attempts to harass non-HOA residents would result in serious legal action. But Regina wasn't done yet. Her final move in this round? A full-scale smear campaign. She mailed letters to every resident in town, painting Jake as a reckless outsider. She accused him of environmental violations, unsafe farming practices, and even devaluing the neighborhood. It didn't take long for Jake to feel the impact. People who had once been friendly started avoiding him, some businesses he had worked with suddenly became too busy to take his orders. He wasn't surprised. Regina had money and influence and she knew how to weaponize public opinion. But what she didn't realize? Jake wasn't just playing defense anymore. He was getting ready to end this. Jake had spent weeks dealing with Regina's underhanded tactics, fake fines, bogus inspections, trespassing, and even sabotage, but when she started messing with his business and reputation, he knew it was only a matter of time before she tried something bigger. He didn't have to wait long. It started just after sundown. Jake was out checking his fences when his motion detector lights flared to life. He turned toward the edge of his property and saw movement near the tree line. Narrowing his eyes, he grabbed his binoculars and took a closer look. And there she was. Regina Holloway, dressed like she was leading a corporate takeover, stood at the head of a small army of HOA enforcers and hired workers. Some were carrying tools, others had stacks of signs, and a few even had measuring equipment. Jake took a slow, deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. He'd been expecting this. Stepping off his porch, he made his way toward the group just as Regina strode forward with that same fake smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "This is your final warning, Jake," she announced loudly, her voice carrying over the cool evening air. "We are reclaiming this land under Briarwood Estates jurisdiction. You've had multiple chances to comply, and since you've refused, we're taking action." Jake stopped just short of her group, tilting his head slightly. "And what exactly do you think you're doing?" Regina smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She motioned toward the workers. "Our community has already approved the expansion of Briarwood boundaries, and that includes your land. We've arranged for your fencing to be replaced with HOA-approved materials, and we'll be beginning groundwork for a new pedestrian pathway." Jake exhaled sharply through his nose. "Let me get this straight. You think you're going to tear up my farm and build a walking path for soccer moms and dog walkers, on land you don't own?" Regina's smirk faltered for just a second before she quickly recovered. "This has been legally approved, Jake. You don't have a choice." Jake took another step forward, voice dangerously calm. "You better hope none of you brought heavy machinery, because I guarantee the sheriff would love to have a word with every single one of you for trespassing." Regina didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to her workers and snapped her fingers. "Proceed with the modifications." The group hesitated. One of the hired workers, a burly guy with a tool belt, cleared his throat. Ma'am, you sure about this? If the sheriff's involved." Regina's eyes flashed now. Jake smirked, pulling out his phone. "Good thing I called him 20 minutes ago." A single set of headlights appeared in the distance, growing closer with every second. The faint wail of a siren followed. The moment the black and white patrol SUV rolled onto the dirt road, every worker froze. Regina's face went pale. Sheriff Hank Lawson stepped out of the vehicle, thumbs hooked in his belt, taking in the scene. He let out a long sigh before shaking his head. "Miss Holloway," he said, his tone dripping with exhaustion, "I was wondering when I'd have to deal with you directly." Regina straightened, regaining her composure. "Sheriff, this is a community matter. We are well within our rights to—" "No, you're not," Hank cut her off. His eyes swept over the workers and HOA enforcers. "I already spoke with the county zoning board. You have zero legal claim over this property, and now, you're standing on private land with workers preparing to alter it. That makes this criminal trespassing and attempted property damage." Regina's mouth opened, but no words came out. Hank looked at the workers. "And let me be very clear. If any of you put so much as a shovel in the ground, you'll be charged right alongside her." That was all it took. The hired crew immediately started backing away. One guy mumbled an apology to Jake before hurrying off. A few others were already loading their tools back into their trucks. Even Regina's most loyal HOA enforcers looked uneasy. Realizing she was losing control, Regina clenched her fists. This isn't over, she snapped. I will find a way to take this land one way or another, Jake crossed his arms, watching her unravel with amusement. "You've already tried every trick in the book, Regina. And you've lost, maybe it's time to take the hint. Her face burned red with fury. Hank smirked. You and your HOA have pushed your luck for the last time. If I have to come out here again because of you, it won't be with a warning. It'll be with arrest warrants. Regina's chest heaved with anger, but she had no more cards left to play. With one last venomous glare, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car. Her remaining followers scrambled after her, eager to get as far away from this disaster as possible. The headlights of their SUVs disappeared down the road, leaving behind only a few trampled patches of dirt and a pile of abandoned HOA signs. Sheriff Hank let out a long breath. You sure know how to pick your enemies. Jake chuckled. She picked me. Hank shook his head. Keep your cameras running and your lawyer on speed dial. She's stubborn, but after tonight, I doubt she'll find many willing to back her up. Jake nodded, already mentally reinforcing his fences, checking his security feeds, and making a mental note to update Travis, his lawyer. He knew Regina wasn't going to let this go quietly. But after tonight, she was running out of options. And that meant the real fight was almost over. Regina had lost the battle, but Jake knew she wasn't the kind of person to walk away quietly. He expected a few more desperate moves, maybe another round of fake fines, another attempt to turn the town against him. What he didn't expect was how fast her entire empire would collapse. Just a few days after her failed land grab, the county launched an official investigation into Briarwood Estates' HOA practices. Thanks to Jake's lawyer, Travis, who had forwarded every fraudulent fine, false claim, and harassment attempt, the zoning board had enough to start digging into Regina's financial records. What they found wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. She had been misusing HOA funds for years, funneling money into enhancement projects that just so happened to benefit her own property. Word spread fast. The very people who once feared Regina's authority turned against her overnight. HOA members called for an emergency vote, and in the most glorious act of poetic justice, she was removed as president by the same people she had controlled for years. With her power stripped away, the HOA had no choice but to drop all claims against Jake's land. They even issued a formal apology, no doubt to avoid legal action. But Jake wasn't done. In a final act of petty but deeply satisfying revenge, he named his newest pig Regina. It wasn't long before the entire town knew about it. Every time visitors came by, they got to hear him call out, "Regina, quit squealing." No one wants to hear it. Farmers, shop owners, and even a few ex-HOA members couldn't help but laugh. Regina, the former HOA president, was not amused. One afternoon, she actually showed up at Jake's gate, seething with rage, demanding he change the pig's name. Jake smirked. "Sorry, can't do that." She responds to it now. That was the last time she ever set foot near his property. With Regina gone, life on the farm finally returned to normal. No more bogus violations, no trespassers, no threats of annexation. He still kept his cameras running, still kept Travis on speed dial, just in case. But for the first time in months, he could sit on his porch, drink his coffee, and enjoy the quiet. He had fought the HOA, a corrupt president, and a campaign of harassment. And he had won. Have you ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA or a nightmare neighbor? Share your experience below, let's see who had it worse.